My name is Christina Alexander, and I am your professor for this course, the first class that is the sequence of 3 sociology classes. You don't have to take all 3, obviously. So 204 is the kind of introductory course, and we go through a lot of different, very interesting aspects of society with it. The first 2 chapters are really an introduction to what sociology is, and then to how the research is done. But then we get into the really interesting stuff: culture, socialization, social interactions, and a variety of things of that nature in the following chapters. But this first chapter is really crucial, and you'll see why as I move through talking about it. Um, I think of all the courses that you could take in college, and maybe this was just because of my own experience, but I don't think so, having taught it for so terribly long now, that sociology can, to use a dated terminology, kind of blow your mind. It and it's also and here's why. Okay, let me put it this way: it's incredibly helpful in understanding what the heck is going on. And boy, if we need some understanding about that, if we ever needed it, we need it now, don't we? Okay. So after this course, hopefully you will have a clear understanding of how social forces impact your personal life, although we're getting a life lesson in that, which is, I suppose, that aspect of it is good in that it awakens us to that. Um, and you'll also understand the differences in research that is valid research and research that is not. You'll understand the difference between common sense and facts and a variety of other things. So this is really, I think, very important and critical learning for you right now. And I know that students have that experience being exposed to sociology because I hear from them about that. So this first chapter is really about learning objective. Yeah, every chapter tells you the learning objectives for the chapter, and this chapter is just understanding what sociology is as a discipline. Then the next chapter we're going to look at how that research is done. So, and the other part about sociology is how does it differ from other social sciences? Well, it differs a lot in many respects, and in many respects it doesn't. The one it differs the most from is psychology. The other social sciences, like political science and history in some colleges, is in the social science department. Um, Economics is a social science. Anthropology is a social science. The one that it differs from the most is psychology. And psychology is the social science that most Americans are most familiar with, and most college students, because you have to take a social science, and a lot of them take psychology. I'm sure many of you have taken a psych class. The reason it's so different, and I want to make clear that psychology has much to offer in our understanding of the human condition. But here's the distinction. Think of the word psychology. Okay, the ology part of all disciplines means logic, study of. That's the root of that word. The prefix, what comes before that suffix ology, tells you what you're studying or what you're learning about. And so psyche is from the Greek, which means basically mind, spirit. It's all in the head, right? It's in the individual. It's your individual psyche. Okay. That fits perfectly, that understanding and way and level of analysis, with Americans, America, it has the most individualistic society of any culture on earth. We value the individual, we promote the individual. If you're successful, it's because of you, right? In America, you're smart, you're hardworking, you're blah 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 blah. Okay. And if you're a failure, it's because of you. It's your fault, right? Okay. That's not how sociology operates. Okay. What sociology does, and also if there's, so let me go back to psych for a minute. If it's all in the individual, then if there's something wrong in your life, it's something wrong with you, right? And you need therapy, or now it's drug therapy more than talk therapy, to fix it, okay? Or make you at least functional or semi functional in your society. Normal, which we're going to get to in a minute here. Okay. That sociologists look at socio from social, society, right? Looks at how various aspects of the society you live in affect you. That includes the norms, the values, the beliefs of that society, but it also includes the institutions of that society. The economic system, the political system, the educational system, the religion. This textbook goes through all of those. The medical system. We won't go through the whole textbook this term. We'll go about halfway, and then we'll pick up those other institutional aspects in Soc 205. So it isn't so much about, and it isn't so much about what's happening. Are you good, bad, smart, not smart? Um, hard work or not hard. It's about what is your place within the society on many, many, many levels: race, ethnicity, gender, age, and what kind of institutions does your society have? What kind of political system, medical system, educational system, etc. How does that affect you? So it's a larger viewpoint and perspective, and that's what sociology does. And we use the sociological imagination in order to do that. So the sociological imagination, for instance, I'm going to give you an example. Think about panhandlers. Most Americans, when they do the research, think those guys they're women. I don't see as many women. I see mostly guys are just bums, right? They're drug addicts. They're drunks. They're lazy. They're crazy, and they don't deserve help. They certainly don't deserve my individual help by giving them any money, right? So we just drive by them often, most of the time. Uh, what does a sociologist think? How does a sociological imagination work? Well, here's kind of how it works. And I've done this so many times with people panhandling. You go, I wonder what brought this person to this corner holding that sign on this day in their life. What was the journey? What's the story here? I'm sure, that a great percentage of those guys, as I said, because that's mostly who I see, are vets, right? They're ex military. Do they have psychological problems like PTSD? Oh, yes. But what caused that PTSD? Well, there's some institutions involved, aren't there? Political institutions, the military, a variety of other things, and at bottom, war and the experiences of that. Those are much, much larger forces, societal forces, than an individual's personality, whether they're an addictive personality or not. You don't dismiss one and say it's exclusively the other. But what we tend to do generally, unless we take a sociology class, is dismiss those other aspects and just look at the individual aspects. So that's a sociological imagination, is kind of being curious, going, let's think about maybe what brought this person to this place at this time in this situation. Okay, so that's a sociological imagination. I've already explained why it's important to study sociology. These are the learning objectives for this chapter. We're going to talk about the origins of sociology and the different theorists, the people that invented, if you will, sociology, and then we're going to look at the sociological theories. In this textbook, they have 4 theories. in most other textbooks, there's three major sociological theories, but they have added the feminist theory as a separate theory in this textbook, and most they're combined. That is combined in the conflict theory, and I know that I'm just speaking jargon to you now. You'll understand as we move through this better. So the whole point of this first chapter is to explain how sociologists think, which, as I've said, and your text is saying here, is quite different than the way the general population thinks. The sociologists, the way they think is based on two things: sociological perspective, which includes the sociological imagination, and we'll talk more about the perspective. But I've already explained it to you to a great extent. It's not about the individual, it's about the larger picture, and valid research. So one of the crucial things you're going to learn, it's always been crucial. I cannot think of a time period when it's been more crucial, because you have to understand, I started teaching long before there was the internet. Okay? Long before there was social media. It was crucial then to understand valid research. Well, now it's 100,000 times more crucial to understand what valid research is. And those are the two legs of sociology: the sociological perspective and valid research. And we'll learn more about that in chapter 2. Okay. Some of the chapters, by the way, have true and false boxes. They have lots of boxes and charts and things of that nature. I'd love you to read them all and look at them, because they're a different format for explaining and giving examples of the things that we're studying in the chapter. But this first chapter, because we're going to move into the idea of common sense here in a minute, and so this is a really interesting little box, the true and false chart on questionnaire on page 3, quiz. I hope you'll all read it. I'm going to read a few of the questions, and I'm going to tell you what the answer is. But still take it, because when you read it, see what you think, and then when you turn to page, what is it, the next page, when you turn the page over to page 4, you'll see an explanation of the research of why the answers are what they are. Let's just do the first 4. There's 8 questions in it, but the first one is: the death penalty reduces crime. True or false? The second one is: women's earnings are now similar to men's, especially in high-income occupations. True or false? The third: people aged 65 and older make up the largest group of those who are poor. True or false? And then the fourth one: there are more married than unmarried U.S. adults. True or false? Now, there's 4 more. I want you to look at them yourself and see what you think the answers are. But I'm going to blow the whole thing for you right now and tell you that they're all false. Okay. The first 4 that I read you, the second 4 that make up the 8 of the quiz, they're all false. But most people in America, using, quote, common sense, would say that most of those are true. So I'm going to give you the justification for the false answer for just the first one about the death penalty. Remember that true and false question was: the death penalty reduces crime. Here's the truth. Here's the facts, and you can find the research in the textbook. States, all of the answers are false. Okay, states without the death penalty have had consistently lower homicide rates than those with the death penalty. See chapter 7. That's where the research will be. Okay. We're going to study crime and criminal justice in America. So we're going to talk about common sense in a moment, but first, before we do that, we have one other really important thing to talk about, which goes along with what I was saying about psychology and that type of thing, which is this section in the first chapter of Are You Unique? Yes, of course you're unique. There's your DNA, your physical appearance, your intellectual capabilities, your personality. Anybody who's had more than one baby or even more than one puppy, since I have a new puppy, having had many dogs of mine, knows, oh yeah, Those kids from babyhood, they have unique personalities and preferences and dislikes and that type of thing. And so do the little doggies that we have around us. So yeah, we are unique, but we're not as unique as we think we are. Okay, that's in America especially, but just in general. And that's because we're all socialized. Because if we weren't, we couldn't survive in our society. So what socialization does is it teaches us what the rules are. Another word for rules are norms. And that's where the word normal comes from. The whole point of socialization is to turn us into what our society considers to be normal human beings who follow the rules. And those rules are enforced by what are called sanctions. Most of us think of sanctions as being negative, but they could be positive or negative. Let me give you an example. You're a little 2-year-old or 3-year-old, and your mom says, "Very good. You shared your toys with your friend today. And I'm going to give you a special treat because you were such a good girl and you shared your toys." Okay? That's a positive sanction that reinforces that behavior that she wants you to have and grow up to have and be a normal person. Okay? There's the negative. You were not a very good girl today. You did not share your toys with your friend. You were very, very, very selfish and very rude to her when she came over to play with you. So you're going to go to your room for a while and just sit in there and think about what you did today, how you behaved. That's a negative sanction. Most of us, the majority of the time, follow the rules because we've been socialized. So yes, we're still individuals, but we need to behave a certain way within those. There are parameters within which we may not move out of. You move out of them, a little bit, you get a traffic ticket. You move out of them a lot, you wind up in jail or a mental institution, depending on what your particular story is. So it's very hard for Americans to get out of this idea that we're all just individuals and do whatever we want. No, we do not. We do what we've been taught to do, basically, by our society, our schools, the police, the institute of laws, I should say, rather. But an example in our culture, our cultural beliefs and our norms and our religion. So the example your textbook gives you is cultures that have, like ours, believe in romantic love as a basis for marriage. Uh, Look how that turned out with Romeo and Juliet. Everybody dies at the end, pretty much. Um, and cultures that believe in arranged marriages, like many Muslim countries and much of India. Okay, we think they're nuts, and they think we're nuts, right? Because from their perspective, the arranged marriage perspective, it's a pretty fragile basis for a lifelong connection, to raise children, to have a home, etc., to keep kinship ties going with two people saying, at 18 or 19 or 20, "I love you, I want to be with you forever." And we know what our divorce rate is. Okay. So for them, the perspective is you are contributing and adding to an already large family system. There's land held in common often, that type of thing. So that's why they're arranged. But we follow the rules. And when we don't, there are sanctions. We get into trouble in our society. So that's where um, it's not a conflict so much, but it can be. But it's a balance between being an individual and being a normal person in your society. The next thing is that your text talked about isn't sociology just common sense? And the answer is no, it's not. It's not, because common sense, as you'll see, is not necessarily doesn't necessarily have anything to do with facts. You saw that in the true and false test. Most of those are common sense questions that, the death penalty deters homicide and crime, et cetera, et cetera. So the example that they give you in here is you have a wreck, and the person who caused it is a female driver, and so this oh, women are terrible drivers trope gets passed around for generations. In reality, most accidents are caused by males and young male drivers, adolescent male drivers. And if you want proof of that, just check the insurance rates between an adolescent female driver and an adolescent male driver, because those insurance companies aren't going to lose money if they can avoid it. So the deal with common sense is that it ignores facts. Then those pesky facts, right? So it's subjective. And because common sense is subjective, it ignores the facts that challenge the belief that is held by this idea of common sense. So it's, for instance, it's much more likely to be assaulted or murdered by someone you know than by a criminal out on the street. But that's not something we're afraid of generally, right? We have this common sense idea that it's the guy walking down the street in the dark of the night or standing outside the convenience store or something that's going to assault us. And in reality, it's in our families often, most of the time actually, that happens, or friends, families or friends. And of course, common sense varies across groups and cultures as well. What's common sense or knowledge in one society, is not in another. We talked about romantic love versus arranged marriage as an example. And also, lots of common sense is based on myths and misconceptions. And here's another one that was in the true and false. That living together before marriage is a good way to find out if you're compatible and you like each other and you're going to hang together and all of that. And actually, people who live together before they're married have higher divorce rates. Now, there's lots of sociological reasons for that, which we'll look at in the chapter on marriage and family. But that's the fact. The fact is the divorce rate is higher for people who live together before marriage. And that refutes common sense. I understand that. Okay. So now we're going to explore further about the sociological imagination, and that's seeing the relation. Remember, I told you that was the panhandling person's story. Okay. So what the definition of the sociological imagination is seeing the relationship between individual experiences, being broke and standing on a corner panhandling, and earlier social influences. Whether that's war, whether that's growing up in a dysfunctional, abusive, drug addicted family or criminal family. I mean, there's just criminal, a neighborhood that's rife with violence and criminality. There's all kinds of early experiences. And I like the term previous experiences, because if you look at somebody as an example from a PTSD in a war, they're already young adults when they have that experience that affects them. So that's what the sociological imagination is, thinking about in terms of unemployment. Okay, we tend to think of unemployment as being a personal problem, right? But it can be. If there's very, very, very low unemployment in a society, often unemployment can be primarily a personal problem. Okay. But if it's widespread, that's a public issue, right? And then you have to look through the sociological imagination at what could be causing that? Technological change. Okay. Major economic changes, the boom or bust cycles that are inherent in capitalism. It's about an 8-year boom and bust cycle. Sometimes the busts are much, much more extreme, particularly if they're brought on by, bad lending practices by banks, as 2008 were mortgages with subprime loans. or if they're brought on by an epidemic like COVID. Okay, there's always these cycles, but sometimes they're extreme. Okay, so that's a cause for unemployment. The high cost of education is always with us now, right? So how are you going to get a good job? Well, unless you're going to be a sports star or a music star or a TV star or actor or actress, which is less than 1% of the population or something, you need a college education. So I hope you can see the relevance now of looking at the larger forces on what causes, certain things. Now, micropsychology, kind of those examples are from macro psychology, looking at the large picture, okay? And two of the theories that we're going to look at, or three, counting the feminist theory, are macro perspectives, okay? There is one micro perspective, and I will name these as we get into them here, and we'll explore them. And so micropsychology, sociology, excuse me, examines the patterns of individuals' social interactions in specific settings. It looks at language, beliefs, communication, presentation of self, a variety of things of that nature. But macro psychology, which is the majority of the theories in sociology of the four in this textbook, focuses on those large scale patterns and processes that are characteristic of a society as a whole. They're both interrelated. You'll see how they work. Every chapter we analyze whatever we're studying through all four theories, so you'll see how they're interrelated. So let's look at just one, divorce, for example. The micro level analysis of reasons for divorce have to do with things like communication styles, substance abuse, arguments about money, arguments about childbearing. Those are the two major reasons for divorce in America. Those of the micro level are about money and how to raise children. So they're the everyday interactions that cause tensions and arguments and that lead to divorce. On the macro level, what we look at is how the economy is functioning, the laws regulating divorce and a variety of other things. What are the cultural values and norms, and how technology affects divorce rates as well, which there's a lot of levels at which it can affect divorce rates, believe it or not, from the, sex addict abuse of the internet to losing jobs and an income in a marriage because of technology. So why is this discipline so important to study? I think I've already given you my perspective, but let's go through what your text says. One of the most important things, if you're not going to become a sociologist, which 99.9% of you are not, is that you can make informed decisions. And I underlined informed in my lecture notes from the text. Okay. You can understand what's going on. Man, if you don't understand what's going on, you can't make informed decisions. You know that old saying, knowledge is power? Well, it's true. Okay. Knowledge is power. And therefore, when you have that kind of power to understand what's going on and to make informed decisions, you are not something that is being manipulated or used by other forces. So that's one of the main reasons that it's so important to study. So let's look at understanding diversity. That's the first one. Okay, you're going to see a lot of emphasis on diversity in this course, right? And that's all kinds of diversity, all types, racial and ethnic composition of the U.S. For the racial and ethnic composition of the U.S. is changing dramatically. By 2025, 58% of the population will be white, and that is down quite a bit from earlier generations. And that's freaking people out. As we know, we see evidence of that everywhere. Okay. So, as I said, understanding diversity and hopefully understanding lessons and limits fear, right? That's the other thing. If you understand something, a lot of the fear, if not all of it, goes away. Okay? So, understanding diversity is one of sociology's major themes, and that includes gender, social class, marital status, ethnicity, sexual orientation, age, ability. And all those things, and there are more, we can't mention them all, shape our realities as well as our beliefs and our behaviors. So let's use the example in the textbook. The example they give you is that a white middle class university student has a very, very, very different experience in their academic career from those of a female Vietnamese immigrant first generation college student at a community college. Okay? Very different experience. I'm going to give you an example. Did you know that ex-President George Bush got into Harvard with a C- average? Now, could you get into Harvard with a C- average? No way. Okay? But he was a legacy student. His father and grandfather had attended Harvard, graduated from Harvard, and they were also financial supporters and patrons to a great amount of money of Harvard University. So those are the kinds of understandings of diversity that sociology brings to the table and to the understanding of society at large. So the other thing about diversity that's so important is that nations are interconnected. Okay. So what happens in other countries affects us very much. We've just been, honoring the 9/11 anniversary. We just got out of Afghanistan, which was a result of all of that stuff, ultimately. Uh, so it has what happens in other nations, which may have completely different religious foundations. The people look completely different than we do. They may have completely different economic and political systems than we do. If we don't have some understanding of that, we can get into, as it's called, the fog of war, and a variety of other bad things can happen, even just with business situations and things of that nature. Another aspect of why it's important to study sociology is shaping social and public policies and practices. Okay, sociologists are often very involved in using their expertise in shaping public policy. It's very valuable to applied and clinical and policy situations. Many jobs require an understanding of society and how valid research is done, okay, and to create social change. I think the other most crucial thing about sociology, maybe the most crucial, really, here, because I've underlined it and put 4 asterisks by it, is being able to think critically. Thinking critically is just absolutely, if you can do that, you're going to be okay. No matter what else happens in your life, you're going to be okay. Okay. So you not only need to have this sociological imagination where you understand these broader forces, but to be able to think, that's the first step, speak, and write critically in your life. Okay. So often our thinking and our decision making is extremely impulsive and emotional. There's a place for that. It doesn't mean that you can never be impulsive or emotional, but for really, really important things, you want to use critical thinking, which involves knowledge and problem solving. Um, and it's learning how to understand individual how. Okay, let's go back to knowledge and problem solving. Part of the issue with that, and it makes me so upset now and so sad, is knowing how to do research. And I'm not talking about academic research here, but it's very hard to do critical thinking if you don't know the answer to something and you go to find the answer to something and you go down a rabbit hole to some weird thing that isn't true, it isn't a fact, it isn't real. So you have to hone your critical thinking skills and say, I'm going to double check that with another source or two or three, whatever. You got to know what the valid sources are. That's how critical thinking works. It's a step-by-step process. And the more you do it, the easier it is, the more you build the knowledge and the self-assurance to operate that way and know you're operating that way. So under this shaping public policies, another aspect is to learn to understand how those individual problems are related to larger social problems at both the macro and micro level. So to really apply critical thinking skills, sociological thinking, requires a combination of skills, and that's on page 6. You have to rely on reason rather than emotion. Okay. That first step will stop an enormous amount of craziness in your life. Relying on reason rather than emotion. Okay. Ask questions. Avoid snap judgments. Examine popular and unpopular beliefs. Remember I said look at other sources. Okay. Recognize your own and other people's assumptions. Assumptions get us into trouble all the time in so many ways, in so many situations. Making snap judgments is another term that is almost the same as making assumptions about people. You look at somebody and you called it. You've made an assumption about who they are, what they are, how smart they are, or whatever. So, and assumptions are often based on prejudices, and also watch those points of view. Recognize your own points of view and how that may be skewing what you're seeing or thinking. Remain open to alternative theories and explanations of things. Remember, I said always double check. Always, look at different sources, different ways of thinking about something or looking at something. And please examine competing evidence. Okay, and we're going to talk more about that in the next chapter on research. Understand how public policies affect private lives. That's really, really crucial. You can do this as an exercise for yourself. Just think about why isn't college tuition free of charge in America? Okay, it is in most other Western industrialized nations, are very, very, very low cost. Apply that to the medical system as well. Okay, does that affect your lives? Both of those aspects of things? Yes, it certainly does. Okay. And so those are all important things. Now we're going to talk about the origins of sociological theory. The videos I put up for this week are about some of those early founders. They're short, they're interesting. You'll see the visuals of them, etc. So what is it? Let's start about, first of all, what a theory is. A theory is a set of statements that explains why a phenomenon occurs. Okay, let's say that again. A set of statements that explains why something occurs. Theories are tools. They don't profess to know the whole truth and nothing but the truth. They're a path to the truth. Now, if they're a path to the truth, then the more you learn on the path, or if something changes on the path, then that modifies the theory, right? Okay. We don't think we're going to ever need COVID booster shots in the beginning, right? We learn more. Oh, maybe we will need COVID booster shots. It's not because people were stupid or lying. It's because we learned more, because the virus morphed into something different and more virulent and deadly. So that's how theories work. Okay. Um, they might need replacing over time as our understanding becomes more sophisticated. Okay. So theories evolve over time due to a variety of things: cultural and technological changes, more knowledge. Okay. And so you'll see that sociology theories changed considerably after the rise, for instance, of feminist scholarship uh, in the 1960s. And that's why this text focuses on including feminist theory, sociological theory, as a separate theory. So let's look at some of the founders. Those are the folks in the videos that I put up. Auguste Comte was the first, and that goes clear back to 1798. He lived from 1798 to 1857. Okay, and he really said that if you're going to study society, and he was the first person that we know of who talked about it and wrote about it, that said, if you're going to study society, then you better do it from an empirical perspective, not common sense, not based on assumptions, but empirical. And that means based on observations, experiments, data collection, rather than on ideology, religion, intuition, or conventional wisdom, which is common sense, right? Conventional wisdom. He said, no, you need to use a scientific method if you're going to study society. That had never been thought about before. It had been applied to natural sciences by then, but certainly not to society. Okay? So, i.e., it should be scientific, as I just said, and there are two aspects to that from Auguste Comte's ideas. One was social statistics, excuse me, social statics, and social statics are how the principles of a social order explain a particular society and the interconnection with that society with its institutions. Okay? And social dynamics is the second aspect of this, of how he's thought one should use science to understand society. Social dynamics is how individuals and societies change over time. Both of those ideas are still useful today. For example, the relationship between education and politics. Most of those people that are the politicians that you're aware of have advanced college degrees. They do. So that's social statistics. And then the other aspect, social dynamics, is as well as how such interconnections change over time, and that's social dynamics. So after Auguste Comte, they're doing this in order of age. So he was born in 1797, 1798. We're going to go to Harriet Martineau. There were not that many women involved in the beginning, as you'll see. And she was 1802 to 1876. So we're getting up closer to the 1900s here. And she was the translator of Comte's work into English. I love this statement in your text. One of the modern sociologists said, therefore, that sociology had parents of both sexes, and because she translated his work, which made it and popularized it. And she also emphasized the importance of systemic data collection. So observation, interviews, and objective analysis of data. And she was a feminist, a very strong opponent of slavery, and she denounced many aspects of capitalism as well, which is very, very interesting. She saw capitalism as alienating, degrading, dangerous workplaces, etc. She very much wanted to improve women's position in the workforce through education, through women having equal rights in marriage, which they did not at that time at all. And she was a big critic of American and English, I'm sorry, European religious institutions for expecting women to be both pious and passive. That was their role in life. And most scholars of the time, of course, dismissed her as being too radical. Now, Emile Durkheim, okay, and now we're into the 1900s, 1917. He was born in 1858, died in 1917. He was French. And he agreed with Auguste Comte that societies are characterized by unity and cohesion because the members are bound together by common interests and attitudes. Let me say here, that's how a functional society exists, okay? Bound together by common attitudes and interests. You can see a society in disintegration right now in our society and many others in the world, but we live here, so let's look at here. Common interests, common attitudes, I don't know. No. Now, there's always a percentage of people who don't share common interests and attitudes, but it's getting very, very extreme, isn't it? And the manifestations of those differences are getting very, very extreme. So Durkheim strongly believed in the importance of the scientific method to study things. And his suicide study, he used official statistics. It was one of the first studies done that used official population statistics. And that study was so perfectly done, that research, that it is still used as an example of some of the finest social science research ever done. And we'll talk about the suicide study in subsequent places and chapters. Okay. He also developed the concept of social facts. I mean, named it that. Social facts, which are aspects of social life external to the individual that can be measured. So among those social facts, you've got material facts, which are things like the demographic characteristics, the things you get in a census, as well as others, but like age, place of residence, the population size, etc. And then there's non-material social facts, which are communication processes. For example, you would observe the everyday behavior, how people relate to each other, that type of thing. So those two kinds of social facts, material and non-material. And in our day, those social facts also include what are called contemporary social facts, which are social current, they're called in our day social currents. So that's the collective social behavior primarily. So January 6th would be a social current, and other social movements as well are social currents. I'm just giving you because that was a recent one that you might think about. Durkheim also explored and talked about and wrote a lot about and developed his theories about the division of labor. And so it was one of the key questions that he explored, which was how do you be autonomous and individualistic and still be integrated into society? That's the tricky one. And once again, we're dealing with that to a great degree right now in our society. Because the cohesiveness that's called social solidarity. You know, solidarity means we're together in this. I got you. We're okay. I hate that expression anyway, so overused, but you know what I mean. We're in this together. That's what solidarity means. So you can expand that with social solidarity, people feeling that way with each other, caring, supporting. It doesn't mean you love each other. It just means we acknowledge that we're all in this situation together, or in this country together, in this society together. And so how do you maintain social cohesiveness? Social cohesiveness and harmony is maintained by a division of labor, interestingly, from Durkheim's perspective, which is an interdependence at different tasks and occupations that is characteristic of industrialized societies that produces social unity. It also facilitates change as the technology changes, as ideas change, as we learn more. Remember about theories changing, as new inventions occur. So as labor becomes more and more specialized, people are increasingly dependent on each other's labor or work for specific goods and services. Uh, if you think about it, prior to the Industrial Revolution, or even at the beginning, the very beginning of the Industrial Revolution, a lot of people basically made their own food from scratch. Some grew their own food, depending if they were rural or urban. You know, that became increasingly different. Now we have big grocery stores, and nobody now it's chic to bake bread, but only the elite do it. Primarily, the poor don't. So you are dependent on each other's labor of some kind or another in order to survive. You exchange your labor, the money from your labor, to buy the things that you need to survive. And one of the examples he gives is a wedding where you would hire, photographers, caterers, designers, wedding planners, a venue, on and on and on and on and on. You're all dependent on each other's labor, and all of those folks that are doing the wedding are dependent on, the caterers are dependent on the venue and the food suppliers, that type of thing. From Durkheim's perspective, that all creates kind of social cohesiveness. So social integration, he was the first to test the theory using data. And the way he did that was, now social integration is different than social cohesiveness. Social integration is you feeling and being integrated into your society, part of it. Okay. So he collected data, and the conclusion that he got out of that data was that people who had meaningful social relationships in families, in social groups, in communities, were less likely to commit suicide. That, as you might imagine, is still true today. Isolation is one of the main causes of suicide, you know. If you had any stuff in your schools, assemblies or anything about suicide after something bad happened at school, one of the things that you were told as a group was one of the first signs, if your friends start, and parents are told this as well, start isolating, if they're in their room all the time, if they're suddenly not hanging out with friends, etc., that is a warning sign. Durkheim figured that out, you know, in the very, very early 20th century, late 19th century, by doing data collection on people who committed suicide and how integrated they were with family, with community, with social groups, etc. So those who feel, and what his conclusions were, that those who feel alone, helpless, hopeless, are more likely to commit suicide. And therefore, what seems to be isolated in, now this is the key point here from a sociological perspective, what seems to be an isolated individual act, the suicide, are often the result of structural factors, as in weak social ties. Okay? And the suicide rates are much higher, for instance, at later ages, not the teen years. And that's the same as the original study that he did, late 1800s, early 1900s. Today, men have, and the same they did then, they do today. Men have higher rates of suicide than women across all age groups. White males, older white males, and especially the really old white males, are the most likely to commit suicide. And then what was interesting that came out of his study, I thought, and they didn't include in your text for some reason, because it was one of the main things in his suicide study, was that Protestants were much more likely to commit suicide in his day. I think that is still true today. I'd have to double check that, than Catholics are. You go back to those go back to the social ties things and social integration, large Catholic families, the church, all of those very powerful connections that keep people in that area of social integration. So these connections are still very, very relevant today. The high suicide rates of older white men are due to the interplay of depression, substance abuse, access to guns. That's a huge one. Um, One of the reasons that women attempt suicide more than men and wind up not dying is because they tend not to use guns. Okay. Uh, Older white men do tend to use guns to kill themselves. Hopelessness due to terminal illness and not being connected to family, friends, community, and groups. Okay. So I am going to stop this part of the lecture. I was hoping to get through Karl Marx, but it's too long, and do a second lecture because for some reason my system only takes so many minutes, right? So I'm going to stop now and continue with the second one.